final words, an offering of thanks to his personal health care assistant, Massimiliano Strepetti. Strepetti was with the Pope on Easter as he rode through St. Peter's Square in the Pope-mobile. He says the Pope thanked him for bringing him back to the square for what ultimately would be his last visit. He said Francis then rested and had a quiet dinner in his apartment before going to bed. He started showing signs of illness around 5:30 in the morning, slipping into a coma prior to his death. And thousands are fleeing from their homes in southern New Jersey ahead of a raging wildfire. The Jones Road wildfire destroying about 8,500 acres and is only 10% contained. For more news with a Catholic perspective, visit EWTNnews.com. I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. That is the whole reason this program exists, is to answer questions from those of you who are not Catholic but who have questions about the Catholic faith. Now, in all honesty, I must tell you we're having some telephone issues this afternoon. So at the moment, we're not going to be able to take your phone calls. If that changes, I'll let you know. But there are other ways, many other ways, for you to contact the program. One of them is by texting the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response. And then when you get that, text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, text the letters EWTN to 58177. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook this afternoon, you can ask a question by putting that question of yours in the comments box, and then we will get that on the air. Pedro Quiles, our producer, and Matt Kabinski is our phone screener, but he's standing by waiting for the phones to clear up. And also Rich Jesse handling social media. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
You know what? I'm doing okay. How about you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing decent, thanks.
There was a question that came in at the end of the program yesterday that we just didn't have time to get on. This was from NK watching us yesterday on YouTube. NK said, and I love this question, can AI have free will? Do you think machines will advance and disobey humans like humans disobey God? And if so, when? Thanks, NK.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So I, as it should be evident to all, am not a computer scientist. I am not a cognitive scientist. I am not a specialist in AI. I have very little knowledge of the science behind AI, and I'm an interested, retail user like the rest of you.
Okay.
So what I have to say here is very impressionistic and very derivative on what I have learned from other people. But human cognition is very different from artificial intelligence in a lot of ways. And something that artificial intelligence, the search for artificial intelligence, actually revealed about human cognition that we did not know. Like we learned this in the task of trying to develop artificial intelligence, was the extent to which it is problematic to frame a problem. And there is there's a classic problem now in cognitive science and philosophy of mind called the frame problem, and it derives from artificial intelligence. It's this. Anytime you make a decision, even a trivial decision like whether or not to walk across a room, there are a near infinite number of possible side effects and conditions that could pertain.
Yeah.
And you don't have to systematically evaluate all of them before making a decision. Like you don't have to decide whether to move your foot, first a half centimeter and then another half centimeter. You don't have to decide whether to lean slightly to the left or the right. I mean, there's 1,000 permutations, right?
Sure,
you don't have to decide whether or not to hold your breath for a split second or for 2 seconds or to not hold it at all or what pace you need to take. I mean, none of those things enter. You just walk.
Yeah.
You just walk, right? You have a kind of inbuilt mechanism for determining what's relevant among an infinite series of possibilities under any condition of choice, right?
Okay.
And how we do that's a bit of a mystery, but it's gonna come back to our ability to have an interest, right, that relates to our condition as embodied social creatures, for which certain conditions conduce more or less to our flourishing, with a rather robust concept of flourishing. And so there's a lot to do with our animal nature, our biology, our social existence, and all of these things condition the way we find choices relevant under particular conditions, and then we have mechanisms in place for heuristics. These are sort of algorithmic means of narrowing down the decision space. And a very simple one would just be like, snap your fingers, you turn and look, right?
Sure.
We have a kind of built-in mechanism for drawing our attention to things that surprise and come out of the ordinary, and, threat perception, these kinds of, all that conditions the way we make choices in ways that are all pre-rational. We don't think about these things as they're going on. That's just not how AI rolls, right? AI, or any kind of computer model, it runs on an algorithm that's been designed by humans to tell the thing what's relevant, right? We've designed the inputs to determine what's relevant to the quote-unquote intelligence of an artificially intelligent agent, right?
Okay, yeah.
And if you take the story of Adam and Eve, which is the paradigmatic story of free choice leading to bad moral action, Adam is trying to decide what's relevant in his life, right? Whether it's relationship with God, which is a transcendent good, or the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which is a different kind of existential good, maybe attendant with a certain kind of sensorial pleasure. And these are disparate conceptions of good that reflect different conceptions of human flourishing in Adam's prelapsarian condition, right? It's hard for me to conceive how an AI could be in an analogous place, right? I mean, and so to use the term choice with respect to an AI would be, a weak analogy at best. So there's a Catholic philosopher named James Madden at Benedictine College who has a pretty darn good lecture at the Thomistic Institute podcast on artificial intelligence and how it relates or fails to relate to human cognition and free will and morality from a Catholic point of view. So somebody that wants a deeper dive on that topic, I'd recommend Madden's lecture that's available on the Thomistic Institute podcast.
Well, very good. And that really is a fascinating question, though. I mean, to think about AI and free will and all these things, it really makes you think.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here. And we do appreciate your question. That was from NK watching us on YouTube yesterday. All right, it is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Again, if you have a question that you have for Dr. David Anders, just text the letters EWTN to 58177. That's EWTN to 58177, or you can ask your question via YouTube or Facebook, and we have a couple of those standing by right now. One from Lavina, one from Kayla, one from Jane. We also have some listener comment lines that have come in during the overnight hours. Lots more straight ahead on this Easter Wednesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Carry the faith wherever you go. Catch up with the latest news from Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and the world on all of our EWTN news platforms, including EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, the Catholic News Agency, and EWTN News in Depth. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com today.
Hi, I'm Debbie Georgiani. Adam Bly and I invite you to join us as we tackle the spirit world on EWTN Radio. Adam has assisted at thousands of solemn exorcisms and resolutions of hauntings. He also reaches out to educate people on the paranormal and the occult in our culture. Join us Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern for the Spirit World on EWTN Radio.
EWTN CEO Michael Warsaw.
Hello, family. The death of Pope Francis is a moment of personal grief for Catholics around the world, and I mourn his passing alongside our global EWTN family. We also join the Church in prayers for the repose of his soul, and we thank God for the Holy Father's tireless advocacy for those in the peripheries throughout his pontificate. May God have mercy on his servant and grant him eternal rest. May God bless the Church.
It's Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. If you have a question for David, please text the letters EWTN to 58177. You can also ask your question via YouTube or Facebook. Just go to our live stream and then look for the comments box, and that is where you want to put your question. Going to get to a whole bunch of them on today's program. First, let me tell you about a great book from EWTN Publishing. It is called How to Live by Grace: Divine Fruitfulness in Human Action by Father Wojciech Giertych. This book points to the mystery of God's presence in human action and how we can cooperate in allowing Him to lovingly shape our hearts so that we can produce fruit that will last. You may have heard the name Father Wojciech Giertych. He is the theologian of the papal household. He offers in this book a uniquely insightful exploration of how divine grace works within human actions, elevating them to a supernatural level. Among other things, you'll discover how to determine the morality of an act according to St. Thomas Aquinas. Also, the ways that God invites you to participate in His inner life so that your yes will bear fruit. Do check out this wonderful book, How to Live by Grace: Divine Fruitfulness in Human Action by Father Wojciech Giertych. It's available now at EWTNRC.com. EWTNRC.com. And speaking of great St. Thomas Aquinas, of course, a Dominican, and we here at EWTN, I want to add my 2 cents for the repose of the soul of Father Brian Milady, who formerly was on EWTN Open Line Thursday. He passed yesterday afternoon, David.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And you know,
just shocked me.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Talking to him was kind of like talking to Thomas Aquinas, because he was so deep and so kind to everybody. Just an amazing man.
I'm going to have to chew on that one for a bit. I was not expecting that.
Well, he was with us here on EWTN almost till the very end.
Yes.
And just a brilliant man. He didn't get to EWTN very often. Physically, he was one of our remote hosts. People now with technology can host from pretty much anywhere on the planet. But every now and then he made his way to the mothership here.
And I've been running into him on and off, EWTN and the environs for quite some time.
Sure,
so, he's very familiar to me.
Well, he'll certainly be in our prayers. We're going to begin with this question here from Lovina on YouTube this afternoon. Lovina says, what is your take on the Protestant rejection of theosis? They say it sounds like the temptation that the serpent used in the garden to them. So what is the Catholic understanding on this?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, first of all, I don't think there is a uniform Protestant rejection of theosis. I disagree with that statement. And there are definitely Protestant theologians who recognize the antiquity and the biblicism of this concept. And so you'll find versions of it in Luther and Calvin and other Protestant theologians. It's not the same conception that Catholics would have, that the Orthodox would have, but there's not some sort of uniform rejection. I think is probably more common among sort of less theologically literate evangelical fundamentalist types who are always sort of looking over their shoulder for the next cult to criticize, and anything that sounds unfamiliar they kind of reject as well. That can't possibly be Christian, and they haven't read the Bible, and not attentively, and notice that 2 Peter 1:4 says that we are participants in the divine nature, which is the biblical basis for the doctrine of theosis. And we can flesh it out a little bit. Paul's teaching that through the grace of the Holy Spirit we become partakers of the mind of Christ. We have Jesus' mind. And after all, I mean, do I want his mind or do I want his tattoos? Right? He doesn't have tattoos, but do I want his his fingernails or do I want his mind?
Sure.
It's the interior life of the Son of God that we want to have, not his physical stature, right? And so this is the biblical idea, and the concept is that through the grace of God, we progressively are transformed into the likeness and image of Christ, which is just a deeply, deeply biblical idea, and that's what salvation consists in. Now, the typical Protestant theory is that we're made acceptable to God not by our moral transformation, but by God's fiat, that God imputes to us the righteousness of Jesus and then just counts us as righteous for Christ's sake. But even with the Protestant doctrine of justification by faith alone, classical Protestant thinkers also believe that there was a progressive sanctification that made one more and more Christ-like. Calvin was very big on the idea of union with Christ. The entire Puritan tradition was about the purification of one's moral life and improved behavior and character and so forth. Edwards' book, Religious Affections, started to say infections. Religious Affections is all about the transformation of the affective life that flows from grace. So, there are analogous concepts in Protestantism. I just don't think that characterizes the mainstream of Protestant thought through down the centuries, and I think that's kind of ignorant for someone who say this is an unbiblical idea or a satanic idea. They just don't know their own tradition.
Lovina, thank you so much for your question via YouTube this afternoon. Well, at least I think we've partially got the phones going again, so let's try taking a call at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Mike in Indianapolis, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Hey, Mike, glad you got through. What's on your mind today, sir?
Well, I feel very lucky to be able to talk to someone so knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Quick question. So on indulgences, I was trying to explain indulgences, and I've heard you explain it before online. I was asked by someone who's seen Protestants meet it, how does this differ from working your way to salvation, and how does grace fit in? I didn't really have an answer for that. I know about the repository of that Jesus and all the saints have put up there that we can sort of take a withdrawal from. But the other questions are, just briefly, I know that Paul VI sort of cleaned the slate with the document and sort of redid all the indulgences with the Enchiridion. I'm walking around Rome and other cities, you often see above the door, it says, plenary indulgence available for the living and the dead forever. And I just wonder, is that still, there's one thing about inscriptions, it's like, forever. So I just wonder if those are all invalid now, or if those are still valid. And then lastly, I just wondered, how difficult is it to achieve that last difficult prerequisite on plenary indulgences, no attachment to venial sin? Is it almost next to impossible, or is it a little more achievable than that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, nice resume on indulgences, by the way. You did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And the underlying logic of indulgences, it's connected to the doctrine of penance. And in Scripture, we find that Jesus says it's the pure in heart who will see God. The psalmist says it's he who has clean hands and a pure heart that can ascend the Lord's mountain. So purity of heart, and then the biblical teaching that one must do penance for even one's forgiven sins, which we find in particular the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 12, chapter 24. And then the recognition that process of purification and penance could carry on into the next life, which is inferred from the prayers from the dead that we find in 2 Maccabees, as well as the Pauline epistles, and from 2,000 years of church practice. So that's kind of the basic metaphysics, if you will, of purgatory and its rationale and its connection to penance. And then indulgences are basically a way of enlisting the merits of the saints on our behalf to help us in this process. And it's a practice that goes back to at least the mid-3rd century, when we find not martyrs, but confessors, or those who are about to be martyred, and confessors who were languishing in prison, who are willing to offer up their sufferings and their penances, as it were, on behalf of those that were serving disciplinary sentences within the church. And the church recognized that was a valid exchange and approved it as long as the bishop was in control. And so hence the practice of indulgences began very long ago in antiquity. And contrary to a lot of sort of Protestant stereotypes, it's not something the church made up to make money. It's actually something that the faithful themselves proposed and the church approved after the fact, right? So it's a popular spirituality. To the question, if you're walking on the city of Rome and you find an inscription from 1782 or something that says, there's a plenary indulgence attached to a devotion at this particular shrine, is that indulgence still recognized in the Enchiridion of indulgences or by the Apostolic Penitentiary? I have absolutely no idea. Right, I have no idea. But the truth of the matter is that the list of things that can be potentially performed as plenary indulgences is sufficiently long and accessible that one is certainly not limited to, devotion at Roman shrines.
Right,
there are an
right.
awful lot. I mean, I think isn't reading Scripture piously for half an hour qualify, I think, as a plenary indulgence?
I believe so,
There's certain recitations of the Rosary. I mean, they're just not hard to come by. So you're not limited. And also, for that matter, I mean, how can you go wrong if you go pray at the shrine of a saint in Rome? I mean, you're not wasting your time.
Right.
One way or another. I have no idea about the legal status of those indulgences, but my guess is they probably still pertain. But I that's not an area of the law that I'm expert in.
All right.
Finally, how difficult is it to attain non-attachment to venial sin? So I think it's easy to illustrate this by on a case-by-case basis. And in Catholic moral theology, we can distinguish between, for example, the virtue of temperance and the habit of continence. So you take somebody who is neither temperate nor continent, and so they have the practice of habitually giving in to their passions, at least in one area of life. Let's say somebody who just can't keep themselves from drink, for example, right? And they're not continent and they're not temperate. And then they white knuckle it for a while, right? And they grit their teeth and they go, I've got to get through this. And so they willpower their way to 30 days of sobriety, right? They get the first chip at their AA meeting, right? They're not temperate yet.
No.
Right? The habit of refraining from alcohol is not second nature to them. It's not easy for them. It's very difficult for them, but they are continent, meaning they are not, in fact, indulging. But it ain't easy.
No,
right?
no.
But as time goes on, they begin to develop the habit of temperance, and it grows into a virtue. And they know themselves well enough, and we all know the trick with addictions is that you can be sober for 30 years, and you take one drink, and you're right back to where you were 30 years ago. But the neural pathways are laid down, and you just have to live with that. But nevertheless, you can get to the point where, even though you're never going to be able to go back and drink again, you have to maintain sobriety. It's become easy for you.
Sure.
Right? Because so many other values in your life have come to fill that void with so much more meaning that the thought of going back to where you were before is just hateful to you. Whereas in the first 30 days, there's almost nothing you wanted more than to go back to where you were before, and you were just white knuckling it. Now it's quite easy, right?
Yeah.
That's temperance. That's the habit of temperance. And was that impossible? No, I don't think so. I think it's quite possible. And you talk to people in 12-step groups, it happens all the time. I mean, the people who've been sober for 30, 40 years, and they still go to the meetings, but they got that thing licked. They got it beat, more or less. As long as they stay on the program, they're clean and they can keep with it. And they really don't want to go back. They talk about, I don't ever want to go back. That was a terrible life. I don't want that. It's not impossible. We just apply that logic to other areas of habitual weakness in your life. Right? Is it easy to kick the habit of sin and have no attachment to it? No. Is it possible? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do appreciate that. Thanks so much for your call from Indianapolis. Looks like a few calls can possibly sneak in on our phone system. So if you want to give it a try, the number is 833-288-EWTN. Meanwhile, this question from Kayla, watching us on YouTube this afternoon. My 8-year-old has a question about the upcoming canonization of Carlo Acutis. Why does it have to be a pope that decides a person to be a saint?
That declares a person, yeah. So that's just a matter of ecclesiastical law.
Okay.
And it was not always that way. And in Christian antiquity, canonizations were local and by popular acclaim. So, a holy person dies in a particular diocese, and a local devotion begins to their memory and at the place of their burial, and it grows in popularity, and maybe their renown grows through miracles that are reported to have occurred at that saint or that martyr shrine. And next thing you know, it's kind of caught on throughout the rest of Christendom, and voila, you have somebody whose cult is recognized throughout the Catholic world. It's just sort of grown from the ground up, and that's the way it happened for a very long time. The problem was we had what you might call canonization inflation. and maybe a little bit devaluing of the currency,
okay.
And so the church decided to bring this process in-house to maintain a little bit more control over who would actually be recognized publicly. Now, you can still have a lively private devotion to someone that you think is a holy person who's not a canonized saint. That person just simply can't be advanced publicly, universally to the altar of the Catholic Church, right? So, I have prayed to my deceased grandfather, right? I think he's in heaven. I could be wrong, but I think he is. So I ask for his prayers and intercessions.
Okay.
But I'm not going to ask that the church put him in create a feast day for Louis Hart Anders Sr. That's not going to happen. That's what canonization accomplishes. And now it's reserved to the Holy See, but it wasn't always that way.
All right, very good. And by the way, we've mentioned on the air several times that the canonization of Carlo Acutis is still going to happen, but it has been postponed.
It's been postponed.
And it will happen.
For obvious reasons.
Well, yeah. So stay tuned to EWTN. We'll keep you posted on that. And certainly when it happens, you'll get to hear it on EWTN, see it on EWTN television. And while we're on the subject of radio and television, we will, of course, carry the funeral of Pope Francis, and that is coming up live on EWTN radio and television. That'll be at 3 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday morning, 3 a.m. Eastern on EWTN radio and television. Still working out the possibility of an encore later on Saturday, so that could happen as well. But we know for sure that the live event will happen 3 a.m. Saturday morning, 3 a.m. Eastern on EWTN radio and television. Be sure to stay with us. We've got lots more straight ahead on the Wednesday afternoon edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN.
To ask, why should I pray, is the same as asking, why should I raise my mind and heart to God, since that's what prayer is. But when stated like that, it's pretty obvious. We need to pray because God is He to whom our minds and hearts are ultimately directed. Union with Him is our ultimate destiny. Without prayer, we lose our direction to God as our ultimate end, and thus set ourselves on a path that leads back into the slavery of sin.
This is Jeanette DeMello from Register Radio. Have a holy and joy-filled Easter from all of us at EWTN Radio.
Hi, we're Greg and Jennifer Willits, founders of RosaryArmy.com.
You probably have people asking for your prayers.
This happens to us all the time, and I always want to pray for people, but I worry I'll forget to do so.
The Rosary is so great in this way, in its ability to unlock the power of intercession for others.
By praying the Rosary, we can lift up the sick, the dying, and the souls in purgatory to God and ask for His mercy and grace.
The Rosary can help us to be more compassionate, to be more in tune with the needs of others, and to be more faithful in our prayers for their intentions.
And whenever we pray the Rosary, we can add the prayer that we offer up this Rosary for all those who have asked for our prayers.
Even if you can't remember their name.
It's just an amazing way to cover the world in prayer.
Join us at RosaryArmy.com to learn more about the Rosary's ability to intercede for others and how it can help you grow in compassion and faithfulness in your prayer life.
And learn more about the Rosary by visiting RosaryArmy.com.
Helping build strong Catholic families.
This is EWTN Radio.
Tomorrow on More to Life, the life you were meant to live.
We'll look at how the theology of the body can help you live a more abundant life.
That's tomorrow on More to Life, 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 Central on EWTN Radio.
Now back to Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
It's Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. If you have a question for David, do text the letters EWTN to 58177. You can also, if you wish, shoot us a question via YouTube or Facebook. Looking forward to that. And, of course, there's always good old email, ctc@ewtn.com. Here's a question now from, looks like Jane on YouTube this afternoon. Jane says, this is a question regarding today's gospel. Is Cleopas the same person as Clopas? And was he related to Mary?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So we've got two passages here, one in the Gospel of Luke chapter 24, one in John 19. One refers to Cleopas, one refers to Clopas. And there is a tradition that says they're the same person, but I don't think we know that for sure.
Okay.
Right? I mean, and for that matter, it's like asking if somebody named Mary or James in the Bible is the same Mary or James as the last time I ran into the name. And, you know, biblical names are, some similar ones that cycle, that get wide usage. So it's kind of hard to know. But there is a tradition from antiquity that relates them.
Jane, thanks so much for your question via YouTube. All right, here's a text that came in from Mary Ann. I wonder what the Catholic Church believes happens to Jewish people when they die. Do they meet Jesus?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic teaching is that God offers grace sufficient for salvation to every human being that has ever been born or ever will be born.
Okay.
And that is true whether or not that person comes into contact with the Catholic faith or not. And so the possibility of salvation is open to everyone. Now, obviously, it's your path is clearer and smoother and more manifest if you encounter it in the Catholic faith, because in the Catholic faith, it's like you get unadulterated truth and efficacious means of grace. So the Catholic Church tells you this is what needs to change in your moral life.
Okay.
And here's the grace to make that happen. And that's very clear, right? Outside the Catholic Church, you might pick up some of that message, but it's likely to be mixed with some difficulties, right? And so, you know, it takes grace to ferret through that. And the further you are from the heart of the Catholic faith, the more admixture of error there might be. Now, no one is so far outside the circle that they have no hope. Like that, nobody is outside of redemption just in virtue of their birth or parentage, right?
Okay.
But it is an advantage to encounter the truth of the Catholic faith. Now, Nostra Aetate, which is the Second Vatican Council's declaration on the religions of the world, says that closest to the Catholic faith are the Orthodox. Right. In terms of our doctrine and sacraments, they have the most in common with us. Second in place would be sort of non-sacramental Christians, the Protestant churches. Next in line would be the Jews, with whom we share the whole patrimony of the Hebrew Bible and our connection to Father Abraham. After that, the Muslims, right? And then beyond that, the other great religions of the world and animist religions, and all the way down to the atheist, to the humanistic atheist who has an ethic of care for his neighbor, but doesn't understand its relationship to his creation in the image of God. None of these people is devoid of all light and truth, right?
Okay.
But some are farther than others. So everybody has got a shot. Anybody who dies in the state of grace, now that state of grace could come through explicit knowledge of Jesus and the sacraments, or in some way known only to God, right? We won't specify what that is. That's up for God to figure out, right? Anybody who dies in the state of grace, when they face the particular judgment upon death, would be judged saved by Jesus, and then would either enter into the beatific vision or to purgatory, or not in the state of grace, in which case they'd go to the other place and then await the last day and the general resurrection of the dead, when all men will be judged by the deeds they've done in the body, whether good or bad.
Mary Jane, thank you so much for your question. Glad that you texted us. We also got a text from Roderick today. Roderick says, what is the limit of forgiveness? Can you forgive and leave the person you have forgiven out of your life?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So, the disposition we are to have towards everyone is to love them.
Yes.
Right? And I think it's very helpful before we get to the forgiveness question is to answer the love question. What do we mean by love? Best definition, I think, comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, who tells us that love is two things. It is benevolence and the desire for union. So I want to do good to you, and I'd like to be in union with you. If you have those two things, you have love. Now, as soon as you say, I'd like to be in union with you, your hackles rise, because you say, well, there are a lot of people I don't want to be in union with. And I would answer, well, quite reasonably, very often quite reasonably, because there's something about that person's moral disposition that makes a fruitful, healthy, virtuous union impossible. Like, I don't want to be in union with somebody whose whole orientation in life is towards harming their neighbor. Right, someone who's a serial killer or a drug addict or some horrible person of that sort. I mean, like, what is there to be in union with there? Like, we're not going to get together on robbing a bank, right?
No.
So, it's not a specific union with their particular mode of life. It's kind of a general willingness to be in union with them in some good, right? So, there's a famous story about Catherine of Siena, who saw some hardened criminals, condemned criminals, on the way to their execution. And she certainly wasn't in union with them regarding the crimes they had committed. And they were cursing and spitting God and the church and, refusing the sacraments and all of this kind of thing. And they were really embittered, and they were just nasty people. And so she began to pray and implore heaven for their conversion. And then, I can't remember if it was one or both of them, but before they made it to the gallows, one of them broke down and asked for the sacraments.
Wow.
And she rejoiced, right? So he died reconciled to the church and to God. And so she was in union with that guy. But on that thing, right, she was in union with him about his decision to receive the sacraments.
Okay.
Right? And a lot of times, if someone has wronged us, well, maybe it was a one-off. Maybe it was a one-off. And they, and that's not their habitual mode of behavior. And then your decision to hold it against them is just petty, right? But maybe they have a habit of abuse, of exploitation, of lying, of dishonesty, or whatever it might be, where you know that unless they change that habit, a genuine relationship is not possible. What does forgiveness entail in that case? In my judgment, what it means is I would be willing to be in relationship with that person if they could change sufficiently so that we could be in union about some common good that was a genuine good. And I wasn't being dragged into this exploitive, manipulative thing that has driven me away. Right? And so you kind of hold the relationship in abeyance, but with a kind of disposition of openness should things change down the road.
Very good. Thanks so much for your question. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's bring on a question that we received overnight on the EWTN listener comment line.
Mr. David Anders, I have a question. I thought the Bible somewhere says we must be holy to see Jesus, see the Lord, and then somewhere else it seems like it said no one is holy but the Lord. So I don't know. I was a little confused there.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So the concept of holiness in sacred scripture, the Hebrew word for holiness, kadosh, means separate or set apart. And so there is a sense in which only God is holy because God is the ultimately set apart thing, right? God is utterly different from all of the rest of creation, as different as creator is from creature. And so we will never come to possess God's own intrinsic holiness in an essential way, right? However, there is a participated holiness. There's a derivative holiness that we can have as through our union with Christ we come to grow more and more like God. And in doing so, we become separate and different from, i.e. holy, the world around us that remains mired in sin, right? And that's the call to holiness that is universal and that is the condition of salvation. We have to be moving asymptotically closer and closer towards the holiness of God, knowing that, we're never going to be God full stop, right? That's not the end of the road, right? Because we're always going to be creatures. There's always going to be that distinction between the creator and the creature. But there is this accelerating, ascending progress towards divinity as we are assimilated more and more into the likeness of Christ.
I'm still working on that word.
Asymptotically?
Asymptotically.
Well, that's a concept from mathematics. An asymptote is when you have a curve and a line.
Yeah.
And the curve gets closer and closer and closer to the line, but never touches it.
Uh-huh.
So you can infinitely subdivide.
Okay.
So half again is close, half again is close, half again is close, but you never close that gap.
Never quite make it.
It's always just so. That's this is asymptotic approach to divinity, but you never cross that creator-creator divide.
Fascinating. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Hey, have you checked out EWTN's Podcast Central? What a great clearinghouse for some of the best podcasts you are ever going to hear. One of them is called Outside the Chapel. Father Rob Galea and his co-hosts Elisa and Justine study the weekly readings. They break them down into layman's terms, showing you how they're relevant to our life today. By listening to this podcast, Outside the Chapel, you'll be equipped with the knowledge you need to be a Catholic influencer in today's world. So you can hear this outside the chapel, that is, and other faith-filled podcasts at EWTN's Podcast Central. Here's how you get there, EWTN.com/radio. Once you're there, look for the words Podcast Central. Click on that and you'll find a world, I mean literally a world. For example, this one comes from Australia. A world of great podcasts from all over the place, including a number of the programs that we produce here at EWTN, like Call to Communion. Here's a question right now. This is from, looks like, David on YouTube, who says, what was the relationship between Holy Rome and the popes in the early church? Who had more influence, the Pope of the era or the king?
Thanks very much. A little sort of semantic distinction here. Rome was very allergic to the idea of kings, but okay with emperors.
Okay.
They didn't like the term king, but they were okay with emperors. So we talk about the emperor. So it depends on what kind of influence we're talking about and with whom we're talking about. So in the New Testament, the city of Rome is associated with Satan, the kingdoms of this world, and the Antichrist. And so, the book of Revelation makes that pretty clear with this kingdom that sits on 7 hills, and it's, feasting in the blood of the saints and all this. It's a bloody, ugly image of the city of Rome, and as sort of the heart of the worldly empire railing against God and the church. And responsible for the martyrdom of Peter and Paul and all the saints. And then, of course, in what was it, 67 A.D., Nero, who was a bit of a nut job, sets fire to the city of Rome and then turns around and blames the Christians, for it. They find him an easy scapegoat to pin the thing on, and so he lights up a bunch of Christians on crosses and burns them at the stake. And so it's kind of a nasty place to be around, right? And there's a bishop of Rome, and one of the early bishops of Rome, Clement, he's writing letters to the churches, and we've got 2 letters purporting to be from Clement, probably one of which is genuine, 1st and 2nd Clement. How influential was Clement? Well, I don't know. It's a good question to ask. I mean, his letter is highly cited in Christian antiquity, and it's in some early canonical lists it was considered part of the New Testament. But it was mostly exhortations to the Corinthian church themselves to get their moral house in order. Did they do so? Well, that's a different question, right? Don't know about that. But the early Roman bishops were martyred. They were exiled by the emperor. They ran into all kinds of problems. But by the time you get to the 3rd century, it was pretty well established that Rome was at least the last court of appeal within ancient Christianity, and so bishops from other sees would appeal to Rome if they wanted weight behind their decision. And St. Augustine was famous for the phrase, Roma locuta est, causa finita est, Rome has spoken, the case is closed, And after Constantine's conversion and his suspension of the policy of persecution towards Christians, and his edict of toleration, he turned more and more to patronizing the bishops of the Roman Empire to secure their support for his imperial reign, and they would enlist imperial support for their activities. And so more of a confluence between the state and the church began to develop, and then of course eventually Christianity became the state religion. And the emperor still had tremendous influence and power, to be sure. But when the seat of the empire moved to Constantinople, it did open up a power vacuum in the city of Rome. And so bishops in the West, and Rome in particular, began to function more as sort of the grand men, not just the ecclesiastical head, but the civic leaders of their respective communities, and they would wield wide spiritual as well as political influence, and they would negotiate the return of captives, paying ransom on captives taken in war. They would they would distribute goods to the poor. They would negotiate treaties. I mean, they had pretty wide political and religious influence, and then, of course, by the time you get to the High Middle Ages, the city of Rome and the papal estates had become a state in their own right, and so the Pope is literally commanding armies and levying taxes and legislating civil laws and so forth. And And in fact, that's never entirely gone away. I mean, the Pope still has a civil dominion called the Vatican City-State, and it's a tiny little postage stamp of a kingdom, but it exists. I mean, it's I think it has a seat at the UN.
It's a real thing.
It's a real thing, and you can go to the city of Rome and get a parking ticket, and they'll, I don't know, I guess you can, I suppose, but I mean, there are civil laws even in the Vatican City-State that you can violate and be prosecuted for, and you can be put in a Vatican prison if you commit certain crimes in that jurisdiction. I mean, and there are in fact people in Vatican prisons, right? Because they've killed somebody or defrauded someone or cheated or lied or done something of that sort. So the Church still has civil dominion over the little tiny little area of the Vatican City-State. But to be sure, today his influence is vastly more in the spiritual realm than it is in the temporal. And so it kind of depended on what era you were in.
Yeah.
And but it waxed and waned.
Sure. David, thank you so much for your question via YouTube this afternoon. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's check out another one of those overnight calls that came in on our EWTN listener comment line.
Hi, this is Kathy from Dublin. And my question is for Dr. Anders. What's the situation about people with pets that are terminally ill and the decision is made to euthanize them? Is that a mortal sin?
Okay, so we're asking whether the pets are terminally ill?
Yes.
And is it okay to euthanize a pet? Yes, it is. It is acceptable to euthanize a pet. Yes, it is. Animals do not have immortal souls. They are not created in the likeness and image of God. And while they do possess a kind of dignity as God's creatures, they don't possess the same kind of dignity that a human person has.
Very good. Thanks so much for your call. Glad that you called the EWTN listener comment line, which is always open 24 hours a day. Here's a question now from Micah on YouTube. Micah says, I hear 80 to 90% of Catholic women seek an annulment. It seems there is something wrong with Catholic men. Is it good for Catholic women to marry men who are not Catholic if the marriage will last?
Okay, thanks. I don't trust that number. I'd like to see the sociological research that produced that number. I don't trust that number.
Yeah.
I don't trust that number. And then I also think that that it probably is 80 or 90% of couples in the modern world in the West that at some point contemplate the possibility of divorce. Contemplate. I didn't say achieve divorce, but contemplate it. And, the statistics on divorce are skewed because they include subsequent failed marriages. So if you hear, for example, the number, 50% of all marriages end in divorce, that number is deceptive because that includes people who got married once and divorced, twice and divorced, 3 times and divorced, 4 times and divorced. The percentages of failed first marriages is much, much lower. Much, much lower. Right?
Okay.
But the world we live in, because divorce has become socially acceptable and easy to achieve, I think it's not at all uncommon for people to contemplate it, right? And maybe to throw around a threat of annulment or whatever. But 89%, I don't buy that. Okay, is there something wrong with Catholic men, or with Catholic marriage as such? Okay. Well, I wonder why you would frame the question that way. I mean, maybe there is something deeply wrong with Catholic men, but why not ask whether there's not something deeply wrong with Catholic men and Catholic women?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, why does it have to be all the guy's fault, right? Maybe it is the guy's fault. Maybe it's not, right? One thing that we do see in the modern world is, it's strange, it's bizarre, it's like no demographer expected this, is in the under 30 set today, the divide over religiousness has switched from historic norms. And so it used to be that women were on balance more religious than men. And that's been true for millennia. It's suddenly shifted.
Interesting.
In the modern Western world, young men are now significantly more religious than young women.
Wow.
And not only are they more religious, but they're going in for very traditionally conservative forms of religion, like religious life. Saw an article recently about the boom in vocations to Orthodox monasteries in Scandinavia.
Really?
Yes. Well, I mean, which is one of the most secular places in the entire world.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, young women under 30ish are not doing that at all as a group. I mean, individuals are, but as a group, they're tending to move more towards the secular view of reality and to be more open and tolerant and accepting of divorce, right? And in modern feminist ideology, divorce is, of course, touted as empowering for women and women's choices and women's careers and women's autonomy and so forth. And so it as for whatever reason, as the sexes tend to divide over issues of ideology, politics, and religion, as young men tilt more towards religiosity and conservative forms of religious practice, and young women tilt more towards secularism, autonomy, and careerism, it would stand to reason to me that women in that kind of coupling would be more likely to opt for divorce or annulment than would young men. But that wouldn't necessarily put the blame on men as such. Right? Now, there may be some specific man who's a real jerk, right? So, I mean, there's factors within factors here before we go blaming men for everything that's wrong, right? Notwithstanding the fact that men are often wrong, right? Granted, I understand that, right? Is there something wrong? Well, sure, there's something wrong. Is it wrong specifically with Catholicism? I don't think so, right? I think this is endemic to the culture, right? And I just talked about, say, the way this is playing out in Scandinavia, for example, right? I do think there's something that's endemic in the culture. I think there's a casualness about marriage, an overvaluing of autonomy and personal satisfaction, a failure on all parties, men and women alike, to recognize that marriage is primarily a sacrament of service. It's not about my personal happiness or my personal pleasure. It is about maybe my happiness in a more transcendent sense when I've realized that my happiness is found in giving myself in service to other people, namely the community of the family, and like our failure to realize that, and the temptation to view marriage on the model of the romantic comedy, is let me find my Princess Buttercup who's fated for me from all eternity to be the one woman to meet my every need and all my desires. That expectation is going to lead to disappointment and divorce, and so that's not helping us at all. Is it better to have a stable marriage to a non-Catholic than a lousy marriage to a Catholic? Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick my own children, if I had to advise them, well, Dad, I've found this Catholic guy or this Catholic girl, but he's a selfish, neurotic, egotistical, narcissistic nut job, I'd be like, let's not marry him.
Yeah.
But I found this Baptist or Presbyterian or whatever, or nothing, who in all other respects is a virtuous, kind, self-sacrificial person who's willing to embrace me in a union that is more or less what the Catholic Church means by marriage.
Yeah.
Yes, go for that. Absolutely.
And that's right? When you get busy with the prayers.
Absolutely. Now, but look, I'm not aiming for that. Right. You asked what's comparatively better. You didn't ask about what's best. Sure. What's best is find the virtuous, self-sacrificial, practicing Catholic spouse. That's what's best. But would I choose a terrible Catholic marriage? No.
And while we're on the subject here, broadly, since you are a bit of a Francophile, or maybe quite a bit of a Francophile, are you cognizant of this huge number of the French people who are coming into the church who came in last week at the Easter Vigil?
I'm extremely cognizant of it. Now, we got to put huge in relative terms. It's huge relative to what we've had over the last 3 years.
Sure,
right? So the growth rate, we have to look at the growth rate.
Mm-hmm.
The growth rate in confirmations, receptions into the Catholic Church in France in the last 3 years has been astronomical. Literally, it's a doubling in 3 years. Right. Now, we're still talking about a small number overall. I think it was, about 11,000 people were received into the church in France.
I think so.
And France is, a population of 40, 50 million.
Yeah,
so, I mean, we're not totally tilting the balance. We're not going to be resurrecting the Bourbon monarchy anytime soon. But it is astonishing. And I think the factors are very similar to what we're seeing in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Which is that young people who are starved for meaning and are finding that the promises of sort of radical autonomy and self-definition, Sartre's, l'homme est condamné d'être libre, we're condemned to be free, and so go make your radical existential choice, is failing to satisfy, right?
Yeah.
And so we are making the decision instead for la foi, The faith.
Give me something real. And you know, people are searching for it.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Anders.
Thank you.
We do this program Monday through Friday right here on EWTN Radio at 2 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. Do check out the podcast. As we mentioned earlier, go to EWTN.com, click on radio, and then look for those words, Podcast Central. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow on the Thursday, the Easter Thursday edition of Call to Communion. Until then, have a beautiful and great day, and God bless.